Hello everybody, and this is Todd Jackson, and I'm going to be covering honeybee biology. As you look in the picture in the background, that's a couple of years back, and the snow here in Virginia was actually about 14 to 16 inches, and Kevin's going to talk about hive stands, and that's probably something you need to pay attention to when he talks about hive stands. So I'm going to be discussing honeybee biology, and I'm going to be discussing the bee portion of the birds and the bees that your parents probably had a discussion back when you were younger, and I'm going to give you the truth about the bees. So no matter what they said, I'm going to give you the real story about the bees. The honeybee is an insect. The scientific name is Apis mellifera. Management of honeybees. When bees are in the wild and unkept, they're considered feral. Honeybees have lived in the wild until man came along and captured them, and this is called beekeeping. This started as early as 4000 BC with the Egyptians, and then later on perfected by the Europeans by about 1568. Management and care and control is the difference between keeping honeybees and having them. So it's the difference between a beekeeper and a bee haver. Honeybees are social insects. Under natural conditions, they nest in cavities and build multiple combs. The definition of a social insect: reproduction, division of labor, cooperative brood care, and overlapping generations. Basic honeybee biology. So I'm going to actually cover this a little bit more in depth later on, but I'm just going to go over it really quickly here. The honeybee is divided into three major portions: the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. The head has most of the sensory organs. There are three rudimentary eyes called the ocellia. They have two compound eyes, the antennae, which have most of the sensory portions of the bee, the mandibles, which are used to manipulate wax, and the proboscis, which is used to gather water and nectar. Also in the thorax is basically the locomotion portion. It has 4 wings and 6 legs, 2 forelegs, 2 middle legs, and 2 hind legs. And the hind legs are used for compressing and gathering pollen. On the abdomen, you'll see sphericals on the side, which are used for breathing. And at the bottom of the abdomen, there are wax glands, which when the bees are younger, they're able to secrete sheets of wax for building comb. And then on the back of the bee, as actually everybody's favorite, is the stinger. There are 3 distinct members in the honeybee colony: 2 female caste and males. So there's the worker, female, the queen, female, and the drone, which is the male. Workers. They are female and basically comprise the majority of what's in the hive. They are developed from a fertilized egg. An average colony consists of about 20 to 60,000 workers. The lifespan of a worker is 4 to 6 weeks in the summer and 4 to 5 months in the winter. And the female worker is typically not able to reproduce, but we'll get into a scenario in which they will later on. So some of the basic functions of the actual bee is she has a stinger. Again, that's everybody relates the bee to the stinger, and that's used to protect the hive, and it's a barb stinger. The honeybee also has pollen baskets on its rear legs to collect pollen while she's foraging for nectar, and again, this is used while she's outside the hive. And then on the bottom of the abdomen, there are 4 pairs of wax glands, which are used for producing wax to make comb. Division of labor among workers, based on 2 things: the age of the bee and the needs of the colony. And again, this is actually highly elastic. So let's start out with the beginning of a bee. Once they've actually emerged as an adult, one of the first things they do is they start cleaning the cells. They are considered nurse bees for the first 12 days of their life. So their job is to nurse, take care of the young, and feed the brood. House bees. From day 10 to day 20, they build comb, they clean the hive, they accept pollen and nectar from the foragers, they perform the job of undertaker, they do climate control, and probably one of the last jobs before they become field bees is they actually perform hive guarding or guard bees at the entrance of the hive. And then the last portion of the bee's life is as a field bee for about 20 days until their death, which is about 30 to 45 days, which is about that 6-week period. And their job is to collect nectar, pollen, water, and plant resins, which are used to make propolis. Next we have drones. They are male, and they are developed from an unfertilized egg. They are sexually mature 2 weeks after they emerge. Once they've matured sexually, they fly to a drone congregation area to mate with virgin queens on their nuptial flight. Upon mating, they die. He develops from an unfertilized egg and passes on the genetic material from his mother only. He provides half the genetic material in worker bees. His lifespan depends on the health of the colony. During poor nectar flows and honey shortages, drones may be driven from the hive. This also happens on the onset of winter as well. Drones can be created by laying worker honeybees, and we'll get into this scenario again. This is what'll happen. Queens. Queens are female, and she is developed from a fertilized egg. Hives normally only contain one queen, and is the only active reproducing female. She can produce 1,500 eggs per day at the height of the brood season, and can live 2 to 5 years. She mates with many drones to produce fertilized eggs. Her role in the hive is to produce eggs. She is the mother of all bees in the hive, and she releases pheromones signals within the hive for cohesiveness of the colony. So let's look at this chart here. We've got the queen at the top, and she can lay either fertilized eggs or unfertilized eggs. If they're fertilized, they're female, and they can either be worker or a queen. An unfertilized egg will be a male and a drone. The stages of development of a honeybee. The queen lays the egg. As the egg matures, it hatches and becomes a larva. As the larva matures, it gets capped and goes through a metamorphosis as a pupa and emerges as an adult bee. Beekeeping math. Out of all the stuff I'm going to cover during the honeybee biology lecture, this is probably the most important thing that I'm going to cover, and this will be something that you'll be using throughout your beekeeping journey. So let's start with the queen. The egg is laid, and at day 3.5, the egg hatches. At day 8, the larva is capped, and day 16, the queen emerges, and at day 28, the new queen should be laying. The worker. The egg is laid, day 3.5, hatches, and at day 9, the larva is capped for the worker, and day 20, the new worker emerges. And around day 42, they should be out foraging for nectar and pollen. The drone. The egg is laid. Day 3.5, it hatches. Day 10, the larva is capped. Day 24, the drone emerges. And around day 38, the drone should be headed to the drone congregation area for mating with virgin queens on the nuptial flight. Eggs and larvae. Here's a picture of some comb from the brood chamber, and it's very important as a beekeeper to identify eggs, because that way you know you have a laying queen, or at least she was there 3.5 days ago. So as you look at the bottom row, you can see the eggs in the bottom. As the eggs hatch at day 3.5, they start to form the larva. As the larvae grow and mature, they increase in size until they are finally capped. So you can see the top row, as the larvae start to get larger, that is actually day 5, day 6, day 7, just before they're capped. Unfertilized versus fertilized, or drone cells versus worker cells. And when you look up at the top corner there, you can see the drone cells. They're actually bullet shaped. They're raised above the comb surface, whereas worker cells are flat and smooth with the surface of the comb. Surrounding the actual brood area is pollen, and outside that area is honey. These are used to feed the brood. So let's talk about worker versus queen. Any fertilized egg has the potential of becoming a queen. All the eggs are fed royal jelly for the first 3 days as a larva. When is a queen made? Swarming, and this is the natural reproductive cycle of a honeybee colony. Another reason for a new queen to be made is a supersedure, and this is when the queen's pheromones start to fail. The workers can identify this and they make a replacement queen. And then last but not least is an emergency. And this is when something happens to the queen, and pretty much that's the beekeeper that does this one. They're the one that kills the queen, not keeping an eye on her, pinching her, rolling her, squeezing her, crushing her, killing her. Bad beekeeper. In all cases, these fertilized larvae are housed in larger cells and fed large amounts of royal jelly throughout their larval life. Depending on the location on the frame, you can kind of determine what type of cells these are. Supersedure cells are queen cells that are found along the center of a given frame. Swarm cells are found clinging to the bottom of the brood frame. In a swarming process, the old queen participates in the requeening process. In an emergency situation, the old queen does not participate in the requeening process. The new virgin queen. One of the first things she does after she emerges is she seeks out the other queen cells and kills the developing queens. If she encounters another queen, they actually fight to the death. After a few days, her exoskeleton hardens and she goes on her mating flight. She mates with 7 to 14 drones. After she returns from her nuptial flight, she starts to lay eggs a few days later. What happens if the new queen doesn't make it back? Say she runs into a bird or a dragonfly. Then you need to figure out what are you going to do at this point. So what happens if your queen doesn't make it back from her nuptial flight? You can order a queen and introduce a new queen. Or you can take a frame of eggs and larvae from another hive and introduce that and allow those workers to replace the queen and make a new one. So if not, what happens? So say that you fail to requeen the colony. Well, you're going to go into what's called a laying worker colony, where the workers actually start to lay eggs which are unfertilized. And at that point, you can look at the cells and you can see multiple eggs at the bottom of the cell. Number one is the abdomen of the worker is not as long as a queen, so they cannot lay the egg in the middle of the cell. Also, this is kind of in a panic situation, so they are laying multiple eggs. So this is what you'll see in the typical laying worker colony. As those eggs are capped over, you'll see all these bullet-shaped drone cells. And normally this is a situation that is hard to recover from, but with a lot of work and a lot of tenacity, you can actually take care of this and fix it again, but this takes a lot of work and some people really don't put the effort into recovering from a laying worker colony. So let's play Find the Queen. This is one of those things that you can tell that the queen's been there if you see eggs, but you need to also be able to identify the queen. So we're going to play a little game here at the end is identify the queen. So let's see what we find here. So here's kind of a bonus. You can see the queen right there in the center and she's marked. She's got a green marking on her and she's marked. So this makes it really easy for you to find her. Right there. And again, this is kind of comes from the caveat of marking your queens. Now, a lot of people are not very comfortable with marking their queens because they're afraid to kill her or crush her. So if you want to practice, the best place to practice is on a drone. They don't have a stinger, they're large, and they're semi-disposable. So let's look at this frame. This frame, the queen is not marked, so the difficulty factor is increased. So let's see if we can find the queen. And there she is. So again, marking your queen helps you identify her. And when you're doing hive inspections, when you locate her, it allows you to be more careful when you're working with that frame. Next scenario, where's the queen? There we go, right there. There's the queen. Again, the queen's not marked, and it really makes it difficult to locate the queen. So our last scenario. When I was discussing queens, I mentioned that there was normally only one queen in the colony. Well, there she is. But in this scenario, there's actually another queen. And this comes where marking your queen really helps you out. This is most likely a mother-daughter combo. The daughter came back from a mating flight and did not kill her mom in the process. So marking your queens helps you identify what's going on in your hive. Are there any questions? Going into Honeybee Biology 201. And this is probably a little bit more than the basic beekeeper really needs, but hey, why not? So the honeybee. It's an insect, so we're going over the class, order, family, genus, species, and subspecies. The main thing is the honeybee is Apis, which is bee, mellifera, which means honey bearing, and then in this case it's linguistic, which is Italian honeybees. So we are talking about the Apis mellifera linguistic. So as we continue on with this kind of Latin, the insect is actually from the Latin word insectus, which means to divide into sections. So we're actually going to take this honeybee and divide it into its three basic components, the head, thorax, and abdomen. So let's start out with the head, right up there in the front. It is where all the visual, olfactory Gustatory, that's a fancy word for eating. Inputs are received and processed. So the antenna, the eyes, the mouth, and we're going to specialize on some internal structures in the head. So the antenna are the major collection tools for the bee. It's got taste receptors, it has touch and smell. The antenna also can detect temperature, humidity, carbon dioxide, along with gravity and wind speed. These are very, very important to the bee. The antenna itself is divided into three main parts: the scape, the pedestal, and the flagellum. The pedestal is attached to the scape. These two segments are responsible for the way the antenna moves. It's an elbow-like joint. It allows the antenna to rotate in many directions. The flagellum is divided into sub-segments called phlagomeres. In a honeybee, females have 10 phlagomeres and males have 11 phlagomeres. The outer surfaces of the flagellum are covered with different receptors, each having a special purpose. The flagellum, a worker has 3,000 chemoreceptors, a drone has 300,000 chemoreceptors, and a queen only has 1,600. Kind of the bonus here is, and we're going to see with the sensory organs, is the males really have superior sense, and that's probably because they really need to do their main job of procreating. So they need to find the queen. So they have 100 times more chemoreceptors than the average worker. Now let's go on to the Johnston's organ. It's an additional receptor that's found inside the pedestal at the base of the flagellum. This receptor is able to detect vibrations and slight changes in antenna position. During flight, the actual bending of the antenna as the air flows over the bee can actually detect the airspeed. Also, in addition to this, which a lot of people say that actually bees can't hear, but actually they have a rudimentary ability to hear through the Johnston organ, which they can detect the sound vibrations, and it's their ability for the bees to read the dance language even in the dark. Let's go on to the eyes, and we'll start with the compound eyes. Bees have two compound eyes which make up a large area of the head surface. Each compound eye is composed of ommatidia, which include light focusing elements and light sensing cells. Workers have 4,000 to 6,000, and drones have 7,000 to 8,600. Now again, we're going back to the drone's main job is to find a queen during her mating flight. So again, more receptors for the male. Simple eyes. Bees also have 3 simple eyes near the top of their head called ocellia. They do not focus, but they provide information about light intensity. As in most insects, bees' eyes are not designed to see high-resolution images like ours. They see a mosaic and have better detection of motion. So as we look at this picture here, the bee's vision is in the ultraviolet spectrum. That's where they excel. The humans is more towards the red. So the yellow flower on the left is what we see with our eyes. If we had the same vision as bees, the flower would be what looks like in the middle. And with the bee's compound eyes, that is what a bee would see with that yellow flower. It would be actually a white pinkish with a red middle. Mouth parts. The mandibles are paired and can open and close to chew wood, manipulate wax, and clean other bees. Also, they bite other workers and pests such as mites. The proboscis is used for sucking liquids such as nectar, water, honey, and exchanging food with other bees through trophallaxis. Internal organs. The brain is capable of making complicated calculations on distances for different locations. Giving its size, it is actually very powerful. The subesophageal ganglion, the main component of the nervous system, is in addition to the ventricle nerve cord that runs all the way through the thorax to the abdomen. Now, one really important thing here in the head is the hypopharyngeal glands. In young nurse bees, these are the large glands, and they produce protein-rich secretion that is used to feed the bees. But as bees age, they actually decrease in size and they change in function. They actually going from feeding as nurse bees the young, but they actually change and they're able to break down the sucrose into fructose and glucose. So these actually change over time. But the main importance is The hypopharyngeal glands in young nurse bees actually are used to feed the young larvae. The mandibular glands. In young workers, these glands produce a lipid-rich white substance which is mixed with the secretion from the hypopharyngeal glands to make royal jelly or worker jelly, which is fed to the young larvae. In forager bees, these glands also produce heptone, a component of alarm pheromone. In the queen, the mandibular glands are also a powerful source of the queen pheromone. The saliva glands are a pair that produce saliva, which is mixed with wax scales to change the physical properties of the wax so it allows it to be malleable. All right, now let's go on to the thorax. It is a center of locomotion. There are 3 pairs of legs and 2 pairs of wings. The main components of the bee's legs, and again, these are insects, and these are basically throughout the insect kingdom, is the coxa, the trochanter, the femur, the tibia, the metatarsus, and the tarsus. And those are the major components of the leg. So let's talk about the legs. The front leg has what's called an antenna cleaner along with a velum. This is used to clean the antennas, and it's very important for the bees to maintain clean antennas because that is one of their major sensory organs, so that when they go into the hive, again, that's a dark area, and they use that clean antenna to help them navigate through the hive. Both the front legs and the middle legs are covered with hairs which actually attach pollen. And here's an example of a bee cleaning its antenna using the antenna cleaner and the velum as it wraps around the antenna. So we go to the hind leg. And the hind leg is actually the pollen basket, or in Latin is corbicula, which means basket. Kind of nice of them to say that. And then the pollen press, which is right in between the 2 segments of legs where the bees actually compact the pollen and then put it into the corbicula. And here you can see in this video that there are bees actually using the pollen press to compress the pollen to put into the corbicula. Wings. The front wings are larger than the hind wings, and the 2 are synchronized in flight with a row of hooks called humuli, or singular called humulus. On the hind wing, they would hitch to the folded edge on the rear of the front wing, so they kind of interlock, kind of like bee Velcro, I would guess. But anyways, it actually hooks the 2 wings together so the flight surface stays together. So now we're going to discuss the rudimentary flight capabilities of a honeybee. In the diagram, the wings are shown in blue, the pleural plates are in red, the vertical muscles are in a tan color, and the longitudinal muscles are orange. Now, how this works is actually the muscles pull against the thorax and compress the thorax and decompress the thorax for actual flying, and the wings pivot on the pleural plates. And there you go. The abdomen. This is a center for digestion, defense, and reproduction for the drones and the queens. So I'm going to discuss the circulatory system, the respiratory system, the digestive tract, wax production, and my favorite, the stinger, and then finally the reproduction system. Let's start with the bee's circulatory system. Honeybees have an open circulatory system. Hemolymph, which is the bee's blood, is mixed with lymphatic fluid, and it freely circulates through the bee's body. The dorsal heart in the abdomen has small holes called ostia. The dorsal heart in the abdomen pulses, pulling hemolymph through the thorax and into the head. From the head, the hemolymph percolates through the thorax and back into the abdomen. An open circulatory system is kind of like a garden soaker hose. The water goes in and just kind of slowly seeps out. The bee's respiratory system. The respiratory system of the bees has 4 basic structures: the trachea, the tracheola, the air sac, and the sphericals. The sphericals are actually the holes on the side of the bee. They're actually breathing through the sphericals in the side of the abdomen and are pulled in through the trachea, into the tracheola, and into the air sacs. The digestive tract. The esophagus starts near the mouth and goes through the thorax and enlarges near the end to form the honey crop, which can expand based on demand. The proventriculus removes pollen grains in the nectar, and prevents backflow of digestive food, ensuring the nectar is never contaminated. The contents of the crop can be expelled back into the cells or fed to other workers. That fancy word, trophallaxis. So again, the proventriculus acts kind of like a one-way check valve to prevent the digestive fluids in the bee backflowing into the honey crop. Next is the ventriculus, or the midgut, and this functions as the stomach and is the largest part of the bee's intestine. Next is the myopygian tubes, which are small strands of tubes attached near the end of the ventriculus and that functions as the kidneys to remove waste from the hemolymph. Continuing on down to the back of the bus, we have the rectum. It's highly expandable, which enables workers to refrain from defecating for months, and this is kind of how they can survive that cold winter.
Okay.
Wax production. Workers around 6 to 12 days old can produce wax scales in their 4 pairs of wax glands. The glands are concealed between intersegmental membranes. The workers chew them up and add saliva to form the wax. Now on to everybody's favorite, the stinger. The stinger has barbs and prevents the stinger from being pulled out. The stinger apparatus breaks off, leaving the venom gland and the muscles controlling the gland behind to autonomously pump the venom into the victim. And also the bonus is an alarm pheromone is also released to mark the victim. And now we see the actual function of a honeybee stinger as the 2 serrated barbs bury themselves into the skin and autonomously injecting the venom. Fun. So let's continue on with the reproductive systems and start with the queens. The reproductive system includes the spermatheca and the ovary. The spermatheca contains the sperm from the queen's mating flight during a 1-week window around 6 to 16 days after emergence. And again, this is a very slim window, and after she misses that window, she will not be able to actually mate. So she uses this sperm to fertilize all the eggs produced in her lifetime, and the sperm can live inside the spermatheca for up to 4 years. In the ovary of the laying queen, there are individual ovarioles with mature eggs appearing yellowish. Each egg moves down the tubes of the ovarioles as they become larger and more mature, eventually reaching the oviduct. In the oviduct, the eggs are fertilized, female, or remain unfertilized, drone, and then laid by the queen. Let's go to the drones. The reproduction system includes the endophallus, which is designed to disperse a large quantity of seminal fluid and spermatozoa. Mating occurs mid-flight and lasts about 5 seconds. Drones reach sexual maturity about 2 weeks of age after they emerge. So, guys, think about that. 5 seconds, that's all you get. All right. So let's finish off with pheromones. The bees' main communication source is through pheromones. So let's start out with the alarm pheromones. The mandibular glands produce an alarm pheromone, along as the Chesneskikov gland near the stinger shaft. It actually releases an alarm pheromone and marks you for the other bees to show up to help out. Brood recognition pheromone. This inhibits the ovary development in worker bees and helps nurse bees distinguish worker larvae from drone larvae. Next is drone pheromone. This is what attracts other flying drones to promote a drone congregation area and the site suitable for mating of virgin queens. My theory is probably the drone pheromone probably smells like whiskey, cigars, and Old Spice. Gets all the old guys over there to say, hey, this is the mating area. Next is the Nanzanoff pheromone. This pheromone is emitted by worker bees and used for orientation and recruiting of other bees. Also, the footprint pheromone. This pheromone is left by bees when they walk. It's useful in marking foraging sites and enhancing the Nanzanoff pheromones. Forager pheromone. This pheromone keeps the ratio of nurse bees and forager bees in balance and is really beneficial to the hive. So let's finally finish off with the queen's pheromones. These are probably the most essential pheromones in the hive that keep it together. The queen mandibular pheromone, or QMP, this pheromone is one of the most important sets of pheromones in the beehive. It affects social behavior, maintenance of the hive, swarming, mating behavior, and the inhibition of ovary development in worker bees. Queen footprint pheromone. In the queen, it is an oily secretion that the queen's tarsal glands deposit on the comb as she walks. This inhibits queen cell construction, thereby inhibiting swarming, and its production diminishes as the queen ages. And then last but not least is the Duforce gland pheromone. This pheromone helps nurse bees distinguish the eggs laid by the queen and eggs laid by laying workers. So this pheromone is deposited on true eggs laid by the queen, and it helps the worker bees distinguish between that rogue laying worker and the actual queen eggs that she's laid. So my final slide here, and we have any questions, but actually I have one more, is this picture here actually represents another pheromone present in the hive, and that's called the retinue. This pheromone is basically the royal court. Retinue is a 14th century French word for royal court. Today's word would probably be entourage. So with that, again, keeping with Francis Bacon, wonder is the seed of knowledge.
Hello everyone, my name is Kevin Bird. I'm the Vice President of Tidewater Beekeepers Association. Today I'm going to be talking to you about beekeeping equipment and all that goes with that. First, probably the most popular hive around is the design of Reverend L.L. Langstroth. He was the first to produce a hive that had removable frames, removable frame hives. The main thing you need to know about this is Reverend Langstroth discovered bee space. Anything less than 1/4 of an inch, bees will propolis it up. Anything more than 3/8 of an inch, they will put burr comb across it. Now, this is extremely important in the hive because you don't want any extra space and you don't want too little bit of space. Basic woodenware of the Langstroth hive. You have a cover, an inner cover, supers, brood chambers, and a bottom board. Put them all together and you got yourself a Langstroth beehive. Hive stands. Hive stands are used to elevate the bottom board off the ground. A lot of people like to have them about 18 inches off the ground to keep them out of the grass and to keep possums or skunks from messing with the bees at the entrance. Here's some examples of some different hive stands. Either the concrete blocks to railroad ties, logs, about anything will work to hold up a beehive. You even have the manufacturer stand on the bottom left there, which is a black plastic stand, which is nice when you have real wet ground because it'll last a long time. Disadvantage might be is the cost. Hive stand considerations be the strength. Got to remember how heavy your hives could be. How easy is it to maintain? The wearability, the versatility, the portability, the cost. If you're going to have one hive, two hives, or whether you're going to have 20 hives, cost might end up being a huge factor on that. Also, you got to think about the height, height where the entrance is, the height of the top boxes when you're pulling the honey supers off. Because if you are reaching up over your head to pull a box off, you might want to think about that versus trying to grab it at chest height. Bottom boards. Bottom boards serve as the floor of the colony, and as it takes off and as the bees take off and land on this platform for foraging, the bottom board is usually the first piece of equipment to rot out. For a longer life, it is set above the ground or on a hive stand. Here's a picture of a solid bottom board. Solid bottom boards will help keep your bees warmer in the winter. The colony should be tilted slightly forward so rainwater runs off the front of the hive. Screen bottom board. A lot of people around here use screen bottom boards. It's used as a part of pest management program to reduce mite population in the hive. The screen allows the mites and debris to fall through the bottom and exit the hive. The screen also allows ventilation during the hot summer months. I've run both. Hive bodies widths. 5-frame hive body width is about 9.5 inches wide. 8 frames are 13 3/4 inches wide, and 10 frames are 16 1/4 wide. All hive bodies are 19 7/8 in length. Hive body by depth. Shallows, which are 5 3/4 inches high and weigh approximately 50 to 60 pounds when full of honey. The shallows are very rarely used nowadays, just to give everybody a heads up on that. Mediums are 6 5/8 high and weigh approximately 60 to 70 pounds when full of honey. And the deeps are 9 5/8 high and approximately 90 to 100 pounds full of honey. Now these are 10 frames standards. So these are the weights of what a 10 frame would be. Just to let you know, a deep, as you can imagine, 90 to 100 pounds full of honey is extremely heavy, and if you're getting up in age like myself, it's very taxing on your back. Most people go with the honey supers as mediums, and a lot of people also prefer the 8 frame hives versus the 10 frames because of the weight aspect of it. Frames. The purpose of the frames is to hold suspended beeswax comb, and it's the basic structural component inside the hive. You have a wedge type, which has a little wedge that breaks off, and you can put wax foundation in it and push the wedge up against the foundation to hold it into place. Then you have the groove type, which is made for a plastic foundation. Foundation. In a man-made hive, beeswax comb is started from a sheet of beeswax or plastic foundation. Workers draw out the foundation by adding wax. The drawn cells are used for storage of honey and pollen, or used for brood rearing. There is natural comb where the bees are given just a frame of drawn comb without foundation. Wax starter or starter strips are used in this. Here are some examples. You have your wood frame with a wax starter strip. I've also used the plastic foundation starter strips by just cutting some strips of foundation and put it up in there. As you can see, you have the wooden frame with the wired wax foundation, and you have your wooden frame with the plastic foundation, and then you have plastic frames and foundation. The two I use the most are the bottom two. They both have advantages, disadvantages to the others. I've just had good luck with both of them. The inner cover. The inner cover is rests on top of the uppermost super or brood box and beneath the outer telescoping cover. It prevents the bees from gluing down the outer cover of the super with propolis and wax. It also provides an airspace just under the outer cover for insulation during the summer, and the inner cover protects the interior of the hive from the direct rays of the sun. During winter, it prevents moisture-laden air from directly contacting cold surfaces. All right, telescoping cover. The main purpose of this, as I said just a second ago, it keeps the bees from gluing it down to the top box. If you forgot to put the inner cover on and just stuck this on top, then the bees would glue it down and you can't get your hive tool up there. Migratory cover. Now, migratory covers are used obviously to migrate bees from one location to the other. These covers are thinner so they can stack the boxes closer together when moving beehives. Feeders. Now, there are loads of different kinds of feeders. You have feeder boxes that have wooden floats in them, which will be your top left. Then you have other top feeder on the top right, jar feeders, which you can put over top of your inner cover hole, and you have your inner feeder, which is the bottom right. All of them have some advantages and disadvantages to them. Now here's a front entrance feeder, which are very inexpensive and you can find on Amazon, eBay, but they're not really practical. As you can see, all these bees on the front of that hive, it's quite possible they're robbing because of the front feeder. They can smell the syrup right at the entrance and it can cause robbing of your hive. Queen excluders. These can be either metal or plastic. Basically, the holes are small enough that a worker bee can go through, but not big enough for a queen or a drone to go through. A lot of people put these over top of their brood chambers, so when they put their honey supers on top, they don't have to worry about the queen bee going up and laying eggs into the honey supers. For years, this has been the common configuration of a Langstroth hive. As you can see, it has the top and inner cover, then a medium super, and 2 deep brood boxes and a bottom board. As you can see, there's the entrance reducer there. Instead of the telescoping cover, if you decide to go with the migratory cover, you would not need an inner cover to go with that. Now here's an alternate configuration. A lot of beekeepers here locally use this configuration. As you can see, the top inner cover, then a medium super, and then you have medium brood boxes. A lot of people use about 3 brood boxes when they're using mediums. Now, the nice thing about this is you can interchange the frames from the top to the bottom or bottom to the top. It doesn't matter because they're all the same size. Advantages to all one size. Weight reduction on a full box. This is huge, especially if you're going with 10 frame equipment. If you go with 8 frame equipment, it makes it even lighter. You can add the honey frames for food whenever needed. Like let's say this time of year in January, February, if your hive's getting a little light and you had a couple frames of honey left over from last year in your freezer, all you have to do is pull them out of the freezer, let them thaw out, and you can stick them right into the brood box to give them food during the winter. You can also move frames from the bottom in the brood box up higher and put empty frames down in the bottom to give the queen more room to lay. This will also help prevent swarming. These are some alternate hive types also. You have a top bar hive. Some people call it the Kenyan hive. It's a long hive that uses basically strips of wood at the top that the bees will connect the comb to. You have a long hive, which is basically like a Langstroth with normal frames, but they just drawn out long. And you have a Warre hive, which is more of a squared off hive. It does have removable frames, but it's pretty much not the standard around here. Also, you have the AZ hive or the Sylvanian hive, and there's also now an American AZ hive, which Steve Jones, Hands-On Beekeeping, offers. These are hives that uses a Langstroth frame that is very similar, well, same size as regular Langstroth frames, just designed a little bit different. Top bar hives. As you can see, they're fairly long, and the frames, they just build the comb right off the wood strips there on top. There are a few of our members have had these over the years. If you are interested in one of these, let us know and we will get you together with somebody that has one of these. The long hive. This is basically just a long Langstroth hive. Instead of a hive going up, it goes out. So this hive is really nice for people who don't want to be lifting a lot over their head or moving boxes. You can just put a like a blocking board and move the blocking board over as the hive expands out. The Warre hive. A French fella, last name Warre, designed this in the early part of the 20th century. This hive, it can be a lot of work because you add boxes to the bottom. So you would have to pick up the top boxes, set them down, put a bottom box on, and then add this back on top. Here's some pictures of the War A hive. Like I said, it has removable frames. They're just a different shape. It's more of a squared off box than the Langstroth. AZ hive. This was designed to have the removable frames from the back and enabled people to have them on their truck like that so they could hit the nectar flow in different locations of the country. All they had to do was just drive the truck, park it, and let the bees do their thing. Here's the front view of the hive. And basically, like I said, is multiple boxes. There are blocker boards in each level, so as the bees grow, you can pull the board out and then they can move up, as you can see in this picture. All right, painting your hives. I'll let you read most of this, but basically the main thing is to protect the wood, protect your investment. You want to only paint the exterior. Also the bottom board, the bottom of the bottom board, you want to paint it really well, but not the inside. The main thing is you would like to have light colors because you don't want it to get too hot in the summer. And also, if you have multiple hives, you might want to do multiple colors or multiple designs on the front of them so bees can distinguish between the different hives. One of the secrets to the best prices in paint is Lowe's, Home Depot, or Sherwin-Williams. I prefer Sherwin-Williams because they're $1 a gallon for mist-tinted paint. I know I'm telling you my secret, but mist-tinted paint, it doesn't really matter the colors of your hive. So I have multitude of colors, from blues to greens to yellows to oranges, all from mist tints. Protective clothing and bee equipment. Now this is a big one, especially for new beekeepers. You don't want to go out there and get lit up on your first day just because you saw a guy in a video, maybe me, not wearing a veil or a bee suit or gloves. Protective clothing. First, your bee veil. The main thing is you want to protect your face. Protective clothing, gloves, good shoes or boots. Usually want to avoid the dark colors. Also, one thing I've learned here this year is electronics. Bees like to try to sting electronics, meaning if you have a nice digital watch, they will try to sting around the watch. Headphones, I always have my earbuds hanging down around my collar. They're the first things the bees always go to. That's not in the slides, that's just some of my personal experiences. As you can see, the different kinds of veils, suits, and jackets. Usually I highly recommend a very breathable jacket that of course has a veil hooked onto it. Suits, I have a suit, but I don't hardly ever wear it. Don't really see the need for it. Jacket's usually just fine with a pair of jeans. Gloves. Now, these gloves, as you can see, the prices can vary depending on whether they're goat skin, whether they're cow's hide, whether they're ventilated or not. The neoprene gloves, dishwashing gloves work great. Nice thing about dishwashing gloves, they're fairly thick. Bees can sting through them, but it's a little bit harder than like the nitrile gloves. But if they do sting through them, you can just pop the rubber real quick off your hand. It pulls the stinger right out. Also, you have a better feel for the bees and the frames when using the nitrile gloves or the cleaning gloves. All right, you're going to find a number of different tools out there in every bee catalog there is. There are tons of them, and a lot of beekeepers like gadgets, and we end up buying a lot of them, and then we usually find one or two that we end up sticking with. Now, one of the most important items, as you can see, is the smoker. You have a 7-inch and a 10-inch smoker. If you only have one or two hives, then I'd say the small one will probably last you a while. If you have multiple hives like I do, which I have a 7-inch smoker, and I have to refuel it about halfway through after several hours, but the 10-inch one will last most of the day if you pack it up with enough fuel. The hive tool, as you can see, that's the J hook. That is actually one of my favorites. The only thing I do different with mine is the squared off edge there. I actually grind that bevel down a little bit to make it less slope, so it goes in between the boxes a little easier. Frame grip and the frame rest, and of course standard hive tool. Now the standard hive tool has that different tapered edge. Like I said, I grind on to my J hook, but the frame rest, that's real nice. When you lift off the lid, you can sit that right on the side of your box. When you pull your first frame out and look at it, you can just stick it on that frame rest. A lot of people use the frame grip. I've used one once, didn't really prefer it, but it might have been just the kind that I use. I don't know. But the nice thing about it is you can get a good grip with it with one hand and just pull straight up with it, and you can hold the frame just like that. Bee brush, another good item to have in your bag in case you need to brush bees off. Queen clip. Everybody needs a queen clip in my opinion, or several. In case you need to catch your queen, move her to a different location, or just set her aside for a few minutes while you go through your hive. Also, a queen marking tube. If you plan on marking your queens, you're going to need a queen marking tube either like this, and there's several other different kinds out there. Now, the bee bucket and tool bucket. I have one of these in my truck as we speak. I thought about bringing it in and showing you, but I figured it wouldn't show up too good on the video. But here's a picture of it. You have your hive tool, smoker. For me, and with a smoker, you have to have a propane torch, I believe, and you can just shoot the torch into the smoker to get it lit a whole lot faster than trying to use a lighter like in the picture here. Also, you can see a spray bottle. This spray bottle probably has sugar water in it. And of course, you might need a knife, scraper, of course, queen clips in there, a bunch of other things. Where do you get your tools and equipment? The big question. Well, here you go. Hands-on beekeepers. Nice thing about them, they're supporting our local businesses. He is a Dadant dealer, so he has everything that Dadant has, or he can get anything and everything that Dadant has. Man Lake, that's another huge outfit there. Really good places right here. I have no complaints about any of them. Questions, comments, or at least